She cleaned houses other people refused to enter, the ones with mail piled behind the door, the ones where refrigerators had been unplugged for years and held the sour memory of meals nobody came home to finish. The ones where relatives handed her a key in a parking lot, said everything inside could go and left before she could ask whether anyone wanted photographs saved. Mara Ellison took every job. She did not take them because she was fearless. She took them because every morning before sunrise, she stood in the doorway of her mother's bedroom in Avondale, Pennsylvania, and listened for Ruth breathing through another night. Ruth had once been the strongest woman Mara knew. She had worked motel laundry, grocery counters, church kitchens, and night shifts that made her hands swell until her wedding ring had to be cut off. Now those same hands shook when she tried to lift a coffee cup. The illness had come slowly then, all at once. First the tiredness, then appointments. Then bills that arrived so often, Mara recognized their weight before she opened the mailbox. By 25, Mara had learned that poverty was not one disaster. It was 100 small negotiations with fear. Can the medicine wait until Friday? Can the electric bill sit unpaid another week? Can dinner become soup again? Can a daughter smile at her mother and say everything is fine while counting coins in the bathroom with the faucet running so the woman who raised her would not hear? They lived in a narrow 2-bedroom rental on Birch Street, not far from the laundromat and the pharmacy, where the clerk no longer asked why Ruth's insurance had changed again. The walls held winter cold. The kitchen floor dipped near the stove. But every morning, Mara made 2 cups of coffee, one black for herself, one with cream for Ruth, and left it on the counter before driving to whichever house was paying that day. She worked alone. She preferred it. Alone meant nobody watched her wipe dust from a dead man's Bible. Nobody heard her whisper, "Sorry," before throwing away dresses no daughter came to claim. Nobody slowed her down, and nobody asked why a girl with careful hands and tired eyes had built a life around cleaning up after other people's endings. Then, on a gray November morning, the call came from Grover Property Management in Westchester. An estate outside Kennett Square had finally cleared a legal dispute. Ashford House, sealed for 31 years. 3 floors, old documents, furniture, and personal effects to be inventoried before sale. The job paid almost double her usual rate. Mara said yes before the woman on the phone finished explaining. She should have asked why a house that large had been left untouched so long. She should have wondered why the manager's voice lowered when she said the name Ashford. She should have noticed the pause after the words locked study. But need has a way of making warnings sound like opportunities. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. Do you believe the person who raises a child is always family, even when blood tells another story? Comment mother or blood below. I want to know where you stand before you hear what Mara found behind the wall of that sealed room. Chester County looked different when money owned the trees. That was the first thought Mara had as she drove west from Avondale toward Kennett Square, leaving behind gas stations, split-level rentals, and the brick clinic where Ruth spent too many afternoons under fluorescent lights. The roads narrowed, stone walls appeared along the shoulders, horses lifted their heads behind fences, old farmhouses sat far back from the road so still and confident they seemed less built than inherited. Ashford House waited at the end of a private lane lined with oak trees. Their branches reached across the road and locked together overhead, turning the driveway into a long tunnel of brown leaves and gray morning. Mara turned on her headlights even though it was 10. At the far end, iron gates stood open between 2 stone pillars. Beyond them rose a pale 3-story mansion with tall windows, a wide porch, and ivy crawling up one side like something trying to pull the house back into the earth. She parked beside a dry fountain. For a full minute she did not move. The silence around the place felt old, not peaceful, not empty. Old in the way a closed drawer is old when nobody has opened it because everyone agreed not to. The grass was high around the path. One shutter hung crooked on the east side. Dead leaves had gathered in drifts against the steps. Mara pulled on gloves, lifted her supply caddy, and unlocked the front door. The air inside had weight: dust, dry wood, cold stone, and something faintly sweet from flowers that had died before Mara was born. White sheets covered furniture in the front parlor. Boxes leaned against the dining room wall. In the kitchen, copper pans still hung above a black iron stove, green with age at the rims. Whoever had left Ashford House had not emptied it. They had walked away and let time do the work. Mara began the way she always did, room by room, photograph before touching, inventory before removal, personal papers separated from trash. Anything with a name went into a labeled box. The ground floor took hours. By early afternoon, her shoulders ached and her mask was warm against her face. She ate half a peanut butter sandwich standing in the back hall, then carried her clipboard upstairs. Most of the second floor had been stripped bare. Bedrooms held bed frames, cracked mirrors, and rug marks pressed into the floorboards. But at the end of the hall, past a tall window overlooking the dead garden, one door remained locked. The brass plate beneath the handle was dark with tarnish. Library. Mara tried the keys Grover had given her. The fourth one turned. The door opened with a low drag. Inside the room was almost untouched. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. A heavy desk faced the window. Filing cabinets stood beside a stone fireplace. Above the mantel hung a portrait of a young woman in a blue dress, her painted eyes calm and direct beneath a veil of dust. Mara started with the desk, then the cabinets, then the lower shelves. When she reached to remove the portrait, the frame shifted strangely in her hands. Behind it, the wall panel did not sit flush. She pressed the edge. Something clicked. A narrow compartment opened. Inside lay a cream-colored envelope, a yellowed hospital bracelet, and a folded legal paper tied with blue ribbon. On the envelope, written in fading ink, were 3 words. For Eliza Rowan. Mara did not open the envelope at Ashford House. She placed everything in a clean evidence bag, logged the find on her clipboard, and finished the room with the kind of control that only comes when panic has nowhere useful to go. But the entire drive back to Avondale, the bag sat on the passenger seat beside her like another person in the car. Ruth was awake when Mara came in. She was sitting at the kitchen table in her blue robe, the television low in the living room, a pill organizer open in front of her. Mara kissed the top of her head, asked if she had eaten, and waited through the ordinary answers. Toast, tea, a little soup, nothing more. Only after Ruth went to bed did Mara turn on the kitchen light and sit down with the envelope. The paper felt brittle beneath her fingers. She opened it carefully, expecting perhaps a will, perhaps an old letter, perhaps some forgotten deed that belonged in a lawyer's file. Instead, she found a folded legal document 2 pages long, dated October 1993. Trust of Conrad Vale. The beneficiary line made her stop breathing. To the surviving daughter of Eliza Rowan, if such child can be located and verified. Mara read it again, slower. There was no amount written on the first page, only language about estate assets, private holdings, and funds to be released after identity confirmation. On the second page beneath Conrad Vale's signature, someone had written one sentence in blue ink. If she is ever found, give her what this house stole. Mara pushed back from the table. The hospital bracelet was small enough to fit around 2 of her fingers. The print had faded, but she could still make out a date in April 1993 and the words, Baby Girl Rowan. She searched Eliza Rowan on her phone. For several minutes, nothing meaningful appeared. Then, an old newspaper archive loaded from the daily local news. August 1993. A brief missing persons notice. Eliza Rowan, age 19, last seen near a private residence in Kennett Square. Investigation ongoing. There was no follow-up, no obituary, no article, no photograph. Just a young woman reduced to 4 lines, and then silence. Mara sat there until the kitchen light began to buzz. She looked toward Ruth's closed bedroom door and felt for the first time in her life that the house she had grown up in contained a room she had never been allowed to enter. The next morning, she waited until Ruth had eaten and taken her medicine. Then Mara placed the trust paper, the envelope, and the bracelet on the table between them. Ruth looked down. All the color left her face. Her hand moved toward the bracelet, stopped, then covered her mouth. "Mom," Mara said quietly, "do you know that name?" Ruth did not answer. She stood with effort, walked to the window, and stared out at Birch Street for so long, Mara heard 3 cars pass. When Ruth finally spoke, her voice was almost completely gone. "I was there when she gave birth to you." Ruth kept her back to the window when she began. In 1993, she said, Ashford House breathed like a living thing. There were gardeners on Tuesdays' deliveries through the side entrance, silver polished before dinners, and rules spoken so softly they sounded polite until broken. Ruth had been 23, newly arrived in Chester County with 1 suitcase and a phone number for a woman who placed domestic help in private homes. She had no connections, no savings, and no room to be proud. Ashford House paid more than motel laundry, so she kept her head down and learned where every broom pan and locked cabinet belonged. Eliza Rowan arrived 3 months later. She was 19 from South Carolina, with a laugh that made the kitchen feel less like a basement and more like morning could begin. She wrote letters home every Sunday in purple ink. She wanted to teach children. She read library books when no one was looking. At first, Ruth thought Eliza was too bright for that house. Then she understood the house knew it too. The Vale family did not shout. They did not need to. Conrad, the older son, was quiet and ill by then, already moving like a man listening to a clock no one else could hear. His younger brother, Warren, had the kind of confidence that made servants lower their eyes before he entered. Ashford House belonged to men who believed reputation mattered more than truth. By winter, Eliza stopped laughing. She missed Sunday letters. She left food untouched. Once Ruth found her in the laundry room, holding a sheet against her chest, staring at nothing. When Ruth asked, Eliza shook her head. When Ruth asked again, softer. Eliza broke. She was pregnant. Ruth did not ask the cruel questions people ask when they want a victim to prove her pain. She took Eliza's hands and said the only words Eliza needed. "I believe you." Eliza had already gone to Conrad. She thought because he was not like Warren, he would protect her. Maybe part of him wanted to, but wanting was not enough inside a family built to protect its own name. Eliza was told to be quiet. She was told arrangements would be made. She was told she would not suffer if she cooperated. But silence was the one thing she refused to give them. After that, her duties changed. She was moved to a room near the back stairs. Staff were warned not to repeat gossip. The cook stopped speaking when Eliza entered. Ruth ignored every warning she could afford to ignore. She brought broth, clean blankets, and the steady presence of someone who would not pretend not to see her. In April, Eliza gave birth at a hospital outside Chester County. A daughter. Ruth remembered the baby as impossibly small, with one fist curled under her chin and a crease between her eyebrows, as if she had arrived worried. Eliza held her and would not let go. By the second night, Eliza understood what was coming. Lawyers, papers, a story polished until no one could see the fingerprints, a baby placed somewhere far away, a mother written out. She called Ruth after midnight. When Ruth reached the hospital room, Eliza was sitting upright, dressed under her coat, the baby wrapped in a white blanket against her chest. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "Take her," Eliza whispered. "Please. Give her a name they will not know. Give her a life they cannot reach." Ruth said she could not. She had no money, no plan, no right. Eliza put the baby in her arms anyway. "You have more right than they do," she said, "because you will love her." Ruth left before dawn with the newborn under her coat and a duffel bag against her hip. 2 buses to Harrisburg, 1 to Lancaster. Then borrowed rooms and fear sharp enough to keep her awake. "I named you," Mara Ruth said, "because Eliza once told me it meant bitter and beloved." She said, "Every woman carried both." Then Ruth turned from the window. "Before I walked out, Eliza kissed your forehead and told me one thing. Tell her I loved her before the world knew her name." Mara did not sleep that night. Ruth tried to rest, but every few minutes Mara heard the old bed frame shift in the next room. Then stillness, then another small sound of someone carrying a memory too large for one body. By sunrise, the coffee sat untouched between them. "I need to know the rest," Mara said. Ruth nodded, but she had no more facts. Only fear. Eliza had vanished 4 months after the hospital. Conrad Vale had grown sicker. Warren Vale had stayed protected by money silence, and the kind of friends who answered phones before questions became records. So Mara called Grover Property Management from her car in the driveway. She asked who represented the Ashford estate. The woman on the line hesitated just long enough for Mara to hear papers shifting. "That would be Miriam Keene in West Chester," she said. "Actually, Miss Keene asked us to give you her number if you called about the library inventory." Mara looked at the envelope on the passenger seat. She was waiting for me. The office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near the courthouse, with narrow windows and a brass sign that had been polished by decades of hands. Miriam Keene opened the door herself before the receptionist could speak. She was in her 70s, small, straight-backed with silver hair pinned low and eyes that made Mara feel there was no point rehearsing anything untrue. "You found Conrad's packet," Miriam said. Not a question. Mara placed the trust paper bracelet and envelope on her desk. Miriam touched the blue ribbon first gently, as if greeting someone. "I was 29 when Conrad came to me," she said. "He was dying. He knew it. He also knew what his family had done to Eliza Rowan." Mara's throat tightened. "Then why did he hide it?" "Because shame makes cowards careful," Miriam said. "Conrad was too late to be brave when Eliza needed him. But before he died, he built something Warren could not easily destroy." She explained the trust in plain language. The document Mara found was not the money itself. It was the key. Conrad had placed assets into a private trust in October 1993. The beneficiary was not named by address or birth certificate because he did not know where the child had gone. She was defined only as the surviving biological daughter of Eliza Rowan. If she could ever be found and verified, the trust would release. "How much?" Mara asked. Miriam removed her glasses. "Enough to change a life, not enough to return one." Then she told Mara why speed mattered. Nolan Vale Warren's grandson had pushed for the sale of Ashford House for years. The legal dispute had ended only recently, and once the estate transferred, anything embarrassing in its history would become harder to reach. "Your inventory log triggered notice to the family," Miriam said. "They know something was recovered from the library. They do not know what, not yet." She opened a thin folder and slid out a copy of the sales schedule. The closing was closer than Mara expected. 2 weeks. Maybe less if Nolan's attorneys forced the final signatures through without delay. Mara looked down at the baby bracelet. "What happens now?" "Now," Miriam said, "we prove who you are before they can bury Eliza a second time, and before Ruth loses another night to fear. Nolan Vale moved faster than Miriam expected. 2 days after Mara left the office, a formal letter arrived by courier, thick paper, expensive letterhead, and language polished until it sounded almost reasonable. It demanded the return of all objects removed from Ashford House, including documents, personal effects, and materials believed to belong to the Vale estate. Miriam read it once, smiled without warmth, and called Mara. "They are scared," she said. "People only write carefully when truth has already entered the room." Her response was 3 paragraphs. The first acknowledged receipt. The second cited the inventory procedure Grover had followed. The third stated that recovered materials connected to an active private trust would remain under legal review until the beneficiary question was resolved. Nolan's attorney called within an hour. Miriam did not put him through. The next morning, Mara sat in a medical office outside Westchester while a nurse swabbed the inside of her cheek. It took less than a minute. It felt too small for what it carried. Ruth sat beside her, hands folded around her purse strap, eyes fixed on the floor. "I am sorry," Ruth whispered when the nurse left. Mara looked at her. "For what?" "For making your whole life wait on a test." Mara reached over and covered Ruth's hand. "My life did not wait. You lived it with me." Miriam had found a woman in South Carolina named Clara Rowan. She was Eliza's cousin, 54 years old, and according to a family tracing organization, she had been asking about Eliza for 3 decades. Miriam called her first. Mara spoke to her the next day. Clara answered with a cautious hello. When Mara said Eliza's name, the line went silent. Then Clara asked one question. "Was there a baby?" Mara could not answer at first. Ruth turned away and pressed a tissue to her mouth. "Yes," Mara said. "Me." Clara began to cry, not loudly, but in a broken way that made Mara sit on the kitchen floor because her knees no longer trusted her. 6 weeks passed. During those weeks, Nolan Vale filed motions through his attorney, questioned the chain of custody, and suggested the bracelet could have been planted. Miriam answered each claim with records, dates, photographs from Mara's inventory log, and the trust language Conrad had written too precisely to be ignored. Then, the DNA result arrived on a Monday morning. Miriam asked Mara and Ruth to come to her office. She did not make them wait. The moment they sat down, she placed the report on the desk and turned it toward Mara. The probability of biological relationship was confirmed through Clara Rowan's family line. Mara Ellison was the surviving daughter of Eliza Rowan. Ruth covered her face. Mara stared at the paper until the words blurred. There was no shouting, no music, no courtroom speech. Just an old office in Westchester, a legal report, and a truth that had crossed 31 years to find the right table. Nolan Vale's attorney stopped calling. The trust executed within days. Funds Conrad had placed away in 1993, grown through management, transferred into an account under Mara's name. When Miriam showed her the number, Mara felt nothing. Then she thought of Eliza, 19 and alone. And everything came at once. Mara paid Ruth's medical debt before she paid anything of her own. Every bill in the folder by the microwave. Every hospital balance. Every pharmacy charge Ruth had circled and recircled as if staring at the numbers might make them smaller. Mara sat beside her at the kitchen table, called each office, and waited through hold music until a clerk confirmed the balance was 0. Ruth cried hardest when the dialysis center said there was nothing left due. Then, Mara fixed the house on Birch Street. Not beautifully, not the way rich people fixed houses for photographs. She fixed what had made life harder: new insulation in the walls, a furnace that did not cough before turning on. A ramp for the back step Ruth pretended was not difficult, windows that closed all the way, a chair in the bathroom Ruth could use without embarrassment. "You do not have to do all this," Ruth said. Mara looked at the woman who had crossed Pennsylvania with a newborn under her coat and a duffel bag against her hip. "Yes, I do." She kept working. Money had changed what was possible, not who she was. She turned her small cleaning work into a company and hired women who needed second chances, quiet jobs, fair pay, and someone who understood that people do not always arrive at work with only work on their minds. She trained them the way she had trained herself. Photograph first. Inventory carefully. Save names. Respect the dead. Never throw away a life because it looks like clutter. In late March, Mara drove south to meet Clara Rowan. The house was in a small town with red clay at the roadside and wind chimes on the porch. Clara opened the door before Mara knocked twice. She had Eliza's eyes. Mara knew because Miriam had sent her a school photograph from 1991. Eliza at 17. Long dark hair, purple sweater, a half smile that looked like she was holding back a joke. The face of a girl who believed the future had already made room for her. Clara touched Mara's cheek with trembling fingers. "She would have loved you so much," she said. She already did. They sat on the porch for 3 hours. Clara told her about Eliza before Ashford House. Eliza, who outran every boy in the neighborhood until she turned 16. Eliza, who wanted to teach first grade because small children still believed adults told the truth. Eliza, who wrote in purple pen, sang badly while washing dishes, and called home every Sunday because her mother worried when she did not. Mara listened as if someone were handing her pieces of a person, bone by bone, breath by breath, until a name on a trust paper became a woman. That night, back in Pennsylvania, Mara found Ruth asleep on the couch with the television glowing blue across her face. Mara covered her with a quilt and sat on the floor beside her. For the first time she understood. Ruth had not taken her from Eliza. Ruth had carried Eliza's love forward when Eliza no longer could. And in that quiet room, both mothers finally felt present, not divided, but joined in love. Mara returned to Ashford House before the sale closed. Spring had reached Chester County by then. The grass along the drive had been cut. The dead fountain had been cleared of leaves. Workers had removed the white sheets, packed the silver, and carried the heavy furniture out through the front doors, like pieces of a life nobody wanted to discuss. The library was almost empty. No desk, no filing cabinets, no portrait above the mantel. Only pale rectangles on the walls where wood and frame had protected the paint from 31 years of dust. Mara stood where the hidden compartment had been and let the silence settle around her. She thought of Conrad Vale sitting in that room, sick and afraid, trying to leave a road for a child he could not find. She thought of Eliza in a hospital bed before dawn, placing her newborn into Ruth's arms, with nothing to give except a name, a kiss, and a love too large for the room. She thought of Ruth on buses in borrowed rooms in winters, where the heat failed, making 2 cups of coffee every morning, because love, when it is real, repeats itself in small, faithful ways. Some things stolen from a life cannot be returned. Eliza would never become the teacher she wanted to be. She would never braid her daughter's hair before school, never sit in a front row, never hear Mara call her mother. No trust could repair that. No legal paper could make 31 years unbroken. But proof had survived. A document, a bracelet, a name, a woman who kept a promise. Mara used part of this money to create the Eliza Rowan Fund, a legal resource for private household workers across Pennsylvania who were underpaid, threatened, silenced, or left with nowhere to turn. She did not name it after herself. The world had already forgotten Eliza once. It would not do it again. Before leaving, Mara touched the bare wall with her palm. Then she walked out of Ashford House and did not look back. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If it moved something in you, please subscribe, like, and share it with someone who needs to remember that love can arrive late and still change everything. Comment your city below. We read everyone here.